Hello, Xycerian here. Today I'm going over my notes for the card Call for Aid. It's a leadership card, it's in the Ant-Man pack, so it's relatively new. And I'm going over it because A, I don't have Wasp, so I can't do anything Wasp related just yet, and B, to me, it seems to have some fairly interesting uses in various different scenarios based off how you deck build with it, and I just want to mess around with a few of those. So anyway, let's get straight into this, because this one hopefully should be a little bit quicker, seeing as we're talking about one card. Assumptions, these are all the same, they haven't changed in forever at this point. I'm pretty confident with most of these numbers at this point. They work out with most of the cards when I run an analysis on it. Like things that you think are a little bit too good and normally end up above this curve. Things that aren't normally fall below. And they're I just think that these numbers seem to be pretty good in general. So I'm just going to keep using them. So anyway, Call for Aid. We have one physical icon. You can have 3 copies of it because there's nothing limiting it. It costs you 1 and it draws you a card. The discard cards from the top of the deck until you discard an Avenger ally, so that card will always be an Avenger ally. Allies have a tendency to be above the curve a little bit. It's a very good card type, just in general. And because you get to choose what Avenger allies are in your deck, you could also guarantee that if you really wanted. So this card drawn could actually be a bit higher based on what Avenger allies you have in the deck. Anyway, you should always find something. You shouldn't play this. You won't generally be playing this with no Avenger allies left in your deck. Because you know how many Avenger allies are in your deck, you can check your discard pile and you know what's in your hand. So you should have full knowledge to determine whether an Avenger ally is going to be drawn. The other important note here is it's only Avenger allies. There are a decent number of Avenger traits on non-ally cards such as Quinjet, Quinn Carrier, Avengers Tower, and Avengers Mansion. Avengers Tower, there was a misprint on the one if you've got it from Rise of Red Skull. It doesn't have the Avenger trait. You need to get the one from the Captain America pack, but that was a misprint. It's been confirmed as such. It's not. They didn't actually remove that trait. Yeah, it also fills the discard for recursion purposes. I thought about putting a whole section on recursion in this thing, but we don't actually have any strong recursion effects at the moment, besides Make the Call, and you stop when you hit an Avenger ally, so you can only use that purpose for non-Avenger allies, and the only one I can really think of where it's not an Avenger and is really important to get set up as soon as possible is probably Black Cat, in a Voltron style deck in my last stream, which honestly I wish I'd thought of before that last stream, but it's just not a very reliable thing to do, I feel. Or not reliable, it's not a very it's not at the moment not a very versatile game plan enough to justify including this card purely for that. But it can be a happy extra thing that you can pull off sometimes, which is not the end of the world. And the discard cards is technically a cost. Well, it's not a cost in the game sense, it's a cost in you are losing value, because you're getting a portion of an encounter card. But encounter cards have variable value based off what they actually say. I don't think they're all that high. Once you get to the the 4-ish point, it actually really slows down the game. And like drawing the second card becomes just way too dangerous. So I think that most of them probably are sitting around the free resource value or less. But I do plan on doing like a full analysis on a scenario at some point to actually determine if that's correct or not. But that's where I think they sit at. I just haven't got around to that just yet. Anyway, so that's obviously all there is to do with this card, but like, why am I talking about it today? Why do I think it's quite important to talk about what this one particular card? And the reason is there's just so many modes of play based off how many Avengers you run, and like you can transition between modes of play sometimes as well. But we'll just quickly go into them. So the first one, which I just call all Avengers. This is where you just run a ton of Avengers. More than you can probably fit in your ally limit. Yep. So instead of including like 5-6 in a free 5-6 with a free ally limit deck, you're probably running, 8, 10, 15, all the way up to 25 if you want to get completely ludicrous. Anyway, you can actually you could actually run Call for Aid to just get you an ally. So you could cut like your 3 weakest ones and still have the game feel like you have that number. So like, if you feel like let's say you're playing Ursa Heroes and you feel like you need about 10 Avengers allies in order to make it work properly, you could run 7 Avengers allies and 3 Call for Aids, and it'll still feel like you've got 10 for the most part. It also allows you to minimize the cost because you can remove the It allows you to minimize the cost of the discarding from the top of the deck because you're less likely to discard more cards because there's less cards that aren't already Avengers allies. But still lets you get rid of some of the really weak Avengers allies, which currently, I think the worst case is probably US Agent. The Kate Bishop Hawkeye is not that great either, but I think US Agent is probably the worst of the Avengers allies in leadership. Just because he has a combo potential with 1 card, and that combo potential is really not good enough. And he does a lot of things, but he does them worse than existing cards that we already have. So if you were running every Avenger ally that's in the game in leadership, he'd probably be the first one I'd cut. And put in a Call for Aid instead. This style really hates the ally limit. It should be obvious, if you're running more than what you would normally think to run in that ally limit, you're going to hit your ally limit and you're going to be overriding characters from time to time. That's not really ideal, but it'll just be happening. As such, you'll probably want to be losing them as quick as possible. That likely means that you're going to need ones that can get decent value without blocking. There's not that many that get more value out of using their last HP for a actual trigger, but there are some that get close. Like anything with 2 frauds, it's like I value blocking and attack as free, so 2 versus 3, that's only losing 1 value. It would still generally put them above, and that's probably where that's probably one of the best points that you can... that's probably one of the best exchanges you could probably make in order to not lose out on the value altogether, because you're going to have to overwrite them, because you don't have the ally limit. Although you do get a lot... it doesn't give you a lot of control over what you draw. Call for Aid will just be a random one. You have so many, who knows if it'll be... let's say you have one that you really need. If you're running 10 to 15 Avengers allies, there's a significantly lower number of that one that you actually need. So, for instance, She-Hulk, Hellcat will stay in play forever and is a very good engine card. Whereas if you're running 10 Avengers, Call for Aid won't find it, but if you run one Avenger in the form of Hellcat, you could put in a copy of Call for Aid and guarantee that you're going to find it. And obviously there's a spectrum there. You don't have to run 10. It's not like you only have to run 10 or 1. You could run 3 or something and still have a pretty high chance of drawing the one that will sit in play forever and constantly remove threat. Yep, so this line here is just about most allies are pretty high value. They're normally a decent amount above the curve, just because the chump blocking is normally pretty good. But you're going to be scraping the bottom of the barrel when you go to a decent number of them. Now, this may not matter in say 4 years' time or something, when there's been just an absolute ton of packs, but at the moment it definitely matters, because there aren't that many Avengers allies, specifically in leadership, even though leadership does have the most of them. You're going to be grabbing ones that you are still going to be grabbing ones that probably aren't as high value. Things like maybe you grabbed the Iron Man ally despite the fact you have very little in the way of upgrades to actually put on him. Stuff like that. Another thing, allies are expensive. So just be careful with that. You don't want to be doing this in someone that's already resource starved like Hulk, because you're just gonna you don't want to be running all the Avengers in Hulk, because you're not going to be able to pay for most of them most of the time. You just can't afford them. Whereas if you run it in someone like Captain America, you would actually get away with this, because he's already got really good resource generation turn to turn. With allies in particular, he could generate up to 3 resources a turn, using just his alter ego and the 2 superhuman strengths. This also is the only one that I'm going to mention here that has no way to transition to a no Avengers strategy, which I'll talk about later. It's 3 slides from now. In this case, it's best to use 2 to 3 copies. You really want to trim as much of the fat of the weakest allies as possible. So, even if you just remove the weakest one that you have still and add an extra copy, you're probably fine. I could see an argument to be made for 2, because the next one down is too good. The next weakest ally is too good for you to actually want to remove it. But you could definitely trim 2 of them down most of the time. In a style like this, when you're running, I would go with this style. You're probably looking at least 10. If you have less than 10, I think you're probably looking at one of the other styles that I'm going to mention on the next few slides. Anyway, next slide, Avengers Engine. Avenger Engine? Close enough. This is the strength in numbers spam one. With this one, I would normally run exactly enough Avengers to fill my maximum ally limit, and then just spam strength in numbers. Like, I know I'm never going to play another ally again because I'm spamming strength in numbers. So I don't really want to. I want all my allies in play all the time, so I don't want them dying. So I'm not going to have any ally limit ever again. So why bother getting even one additional? It's not worth it. All your allies have to be Avengers because Avengers Tower's super awkward otherwise. You could sometimes do it with one non-Avenger, one or two non-Avengers with honorary Avenger, but they have to go down first. It kind of makes it awkward to build this engine. It's why it's particularly popular with She-Hulk, which I'm actually going to be messing around with later. I haven't played in a while, and there's a few cards that I think can make it set up super quickly now that weren't in the game previously, including Call for Aid. It's just it's a strong draw engine, takes a while to set up. Call for Aid speeds it up. And then once it's set up, it gets actually kind of insane. And because of Stinger, you can get to 4 without even getting one of your ally limit cards. And that's already a pretty good number for strength in numbers. It's not like the best, obviously, because that's 6 currently. It will discard, and this will discard some of your relevant combo cards, notably Avengers Tower and Xycerian. But you can grab them on the second run through. I'd probably recommend grabbing them on the second run through. Or if you do find them, make sure you hold on to them, because you will randomly get a decent number of your cards. But if you do use this, it can become a dead card in the late game, because late game you already have all 6 Avengers out. You're already strength in numbersing, and like you're just drawing into this, and like maybe you need the physical icon, so it's not as bad. But if you don't need the physical icon, you may just never really have a use for this card, and it's just being thrown away as a resource every time you draw it, and that's blocking up your strength in numbers draws. But I'm going to keep mentioning this. It can transition to a no Avengers strategy late game, where you have no Avengers left in your deck, and that is now 2 slides away, because they're going from most Avengers to least, and there's only one more that actually has Avengers in it. And I also mention here that if you're already drawing 6 cards, basically drawing 6 cards, an additional 6 cards a turn with strength in numbers, you're going to be able to put out a ton more threat. Not threat. Threat is a ton more effects. A ton more effects than you would have with just your standard hand. Like, you're basically taking 2 turns for every turn that that the villain takes. Like, that's gonna have a huge effect. The copy, and mentioning copies here, I think the copies would vary. 3 would make it the quickest to set up. It makes more sense if you're transitioning to no Avengers. You probably want to lower that if you're not, like to lower the number of dead cards you get with the strength in numbers things, and like any amount of these would be a speed up. So, like if you're running 6 Avengers and this card is completely dead in the late game, maybe you only run 2, maybe even 1, just as an option to speed it up a little bit. Probably go with 2. I suppose it depends what else you can put in. But yeah, that's just my thoughts on what you should do with the numbers if you're trying to just build an Avengers engine. But if you're transitioning to no Avengers, when I get to no Avengers, I'll mention that it kind of requires 3 anyway, so if you are transitioning, you probably want to go for 3 in that case. Okay. So, the last one is the low Avengers engine. This is the one that gives you a lot of control over what you draw. That is got a typo in it. Let me fix that quickly. Low Avengers. Sorry about this. For example. That probably looked really bad on the stream, considering I know it's cropping my screen in a weird way. Anyway, yeah, so low Avengers. It allows you to grab, say, one important ally or from a small pool of similar rolled allies. So previously mentioned, Hellcat in She-Hulk is a very big part of her threat removal strategy, considering it can move effectively like 4 a turn. Like you get 2 from last turn and then 2 for this turn, and then you replay it again. You get 2 from last turn, you get 2 from this turn when you replay it again, and if you can play it every turn, you're effectively getting 4 a turn for the entire game. The Mockingbird ally from Hawkeye is similar. If you can play it every turn, you're effectively spending 4 resources to block every attack and remove 2 threats. It's not bad. Not bad, it could be better, but it's not bad. And the Captain Marvel ally in Spider-Woman can just be valuable. If you're going for like the Captain Marvel Voltron style, it's a very good Voltron target. But when I mentioned the similar roles, specifically what I was thinking of was Voltron targets. Like if you have Captain Marvel, Iron Man, Ronin, all 3 are Voltron targets. If they're your only Avengers, you can guarantee you get a Voltron target. So if you're playing a Voltron deck and you need the Voltron target early, you could play just 3 Avengers and some call for aids, and then all of a sudden you're able to guarantee you've got, say, 6 ways to get one of your strong Voltron targets onto the table. 6 cards in your deck, which makes it relatively consistent to get it very early. In this type of strategy, a lot of cards will be discarded, but you should stop before the end of the deck. So this will be good for recursion-based strategies. Once again, we don't really have a lot of good recursion cards. Like there's Make the Call, like that's the best current example of a recursion card. I think technically you can use Magical Studies and maybe for Asgard. I'd have to look up for Asgard, but because they can pull from the discard as well. But in both of those cases, they're a one-off, so they're just as likely to get discarded as the card you actually want. So it's a bit of a mess. Yeah, Make the Call, I think, is the only good recursion card we currently have. And considering this won't discard an Avenger ally for you, it's only got to use for non-Avenger allies, which it's something to consider if you've got an important non-Avenger, but I don't feel like the leadership non-Avengers are actually that important. They're like nice to have. Same with the basic ones for the most part, with the exception maybe of Heimdall. If you set up like a Heimdall recursion with rapid response, this could be useful. But that's probably like the only case I can think of. Anyway, this gives you very strong control of what you draw, as opposed to the All Avengers strategy having very little control over what you draw. This will also have the highest variance in cost, and on average will be more expensive. You've got less Avengers, so your expectation is higher before you find one of them, which is good for the recursion stuff, but it also means you're closer to your next encounter card. That might be important if a particular scenario has a really high encounter card, just like a ton of really bad encounter card effects. And the highest variance in cost is just going to be because there's few of them. Sometimes, like, you can go to a really high number before you draw the Avengers Ally. Like, imagine for a moment you've got just the Voltrons, the Captain Marvel, the Ronin, and the Iron Man that we mentioned earlier. If you had just those three, and they were the three bottom cards of your deck, right, you discarded a ton. Whereas if you had 10 Avengers Allies, you actually would have stopped like 7 earlier, no matter what. And yeah, you'll get more consistently low numbers of discards. This one here can also transition to no Avengers strategy late game. It's not hard to see why. You can have all your Avengers in play if you've only got a few of them, which is similar to the Avengers Engine. You can have all your Avengers in play, but that's because you have a number of Avengers equal to how many you can actually hold. I would actually suggest with low Avengers to only use 1 or 2 copies of the Call for Aid, because you don't want too many dead cards finding you, that are finding you cards that you only needed, like if you have 2 copies of Call for Aid and you're only using it to find Mockingbird in Hawkeye, you're going to play one of them. Probably you got a 2/3 chance that one of them has use once, and then the rest of the game, Mockingbird's just doing her thing instead. Like, it makes more sense to put like 1, just so that you can more because you can get a significant increase in your consistency. You basically double your consistency with drawing Mockingbird early if you did that. Whereas if you include 2, you're only getting a 50% increase over only including 1. Once you start going to 3, you're only getting like a 33% increase. It's not like there's diminishing returns, so that's why I recommend just 1 or 2. 2 I would probably run if there was a few of them, like in the situation with the Voltron stuff, so that you can start building your second one as well, and have use for the cards that you've already put on your main Voltron target. Anyway, we'll finally get to the no Avengers stuff. Have any questions just yet? Not yet. Okay, you will not be drawing cards with this one. You will be paying 1 purely for the downside of the card. You can often transition to no Avengers from other styles, so you don't have to build your deck for no Avengers. You can have you can start using a no Avengers strategy depending on how many Avengers you have. Basically, you need to have an maximum ally limit that is the same or higher than the number of Avengers you have in your deck in order to transition into this. And you're basically using the downside of discarding cards to skip deck cycles to speed up your ability to play a small subset of your deck. So we probably all know by this point that hero cards are generally better than other cards. It's not always the case. A lot of fraught removal cards are about as good as the best Justice cards, but their damage currently it is the case, and that might be a problem with the card pool, but because I'm not a particularly big fan of aggression, partially because of this. But there are some cards that are really worth it in the hero sets, like particular cards that you probably want to play as often as possible. So things like Hulk Smash is a good example. It's possibly the best card in Hulk's deck, and considering it's basically the only card that has a positive value instead of hitting like under my assumptions, like a aspect level curve, and being able to speed up when you get them is pretty good. There's also only 2 copies, so it's kind of it's more easy for them to be beyond all of them and just have like a dead part of your deck cycle, which with Hulk's low hand size takes forever to get through. Gamma Slam Gamma Slam, I think, is actually probably the best example. I actually use it as an example further down the bottom here. It's just, there's only one copy of it. It's huge. If you can maintain the 15 damage Gamma Slams, so you got your HP down really low, you're going to get a huge amount of plus value, because it costs 5, so it should hit for 7.5, but actually hits for 15, like a plus 7.5 damage over what it should do, which is another 5 resources. Like, that's very much worth it. Obviously you have to maintain the plus 15 hit points, which the below 15 lost hit points, which is difficult, but it's not impossible. It's the important thing. It's not impossible, and if you can maintain it and build a deck that can maintain it, you can speed up your Gamma Slams. I also mentioned Pheromones, Repulsor Blast, Wakanda Forever, Energy Channel. They've all got high value. They're all relatively limited, and like, I don't think, like, you're gonna have trouble with consistently finding Call for Aid after Wakanda Forever, but like, if you're on like a low Avenger thing and you just happen to draw it and it should have been a dead draw, but you've realized you've used all your Wakanda Forevers, you can actually shuffle them all back in by discarding the rest of your deck. And yeah, like, most of these I wouldn't play this strategy. I would, it would come up at runtime. So I was playing one of these other strategies, and then in the late game I realized that I could push myself closer to one of these cards, which I think are strong enough. Almost all these examples are powerful hero cards with 1 or 2 copies. Wakanda Forever is the exception, with 5 copies. They all have really high value versus what can normally happen in the game. The more of these cards you have, the less likely you'll want this will actually work, because you need to have the Call for Aid drawn in either the hands that you played the last of those cards, or after that, while there's still enough of your deck left in order to actually warrant discarding it all. So if you've like already shuffled, these won't have any effect. If you drew all your Call for Aids first, this doesn't have any effect. Like, there's some downsides here. But anyway, let's actually run the numbers on the Gamma Slam example, because I think that's probably the best for this. So we're considering Gamma Slam in a fully built Strength in Numbers She-Hulk deck. So you have 6 allies, 2 supports, that both increase your ally limits, and your Strength in Numbers in basically every turn, because you hold on to a Strength in Numbers if you can. You're drawing a third of your deck, because you've got 32 cards, and you're drawing about 11 a turn. You actually alternate between 10 and 12, based on you flipping to Alter Ego and back. Yeah, so you're drawing about a third of your deck a turn. Gamma Slam will be in one of the 3 sections, right? Because you're drawing a third of your deck, 3 sections of the deck. If it's in the first section, you've got 2 turns left of this Strength in Numbers shenanigans in order to get through the deck, and then you've got another 1 to 3 turns to find it in your next deck cycle. And Call for Aid would completely cut that. Can completely cut that first 2 sections. So you Strength in Numbers, you've got a Call for Aid, you've probably got a Call for Aid because you're running a lot of copies of it. You've got and you've just drawn like 11-ish cards. You've drawn 11-ish cards. So if you've got the Gamma Slam and the Call for Aid, you play the Gamma Slam, you play the Call for Aid, you discard the rest of your deck, and shuffle the Gamma Slam back in for you to try and draw it next turn or within 2 turns, saving you effectively 2 turns. if it's in the second section, you only have one turn extra left, so you're only really saving one turn. It's basically the same situation as the first, except the number of turns is less to save. If it's in the third section, you've either got it in your opening hand or after you strengthen numbers, and after you strengthen numbers, you've already shuffled. So if it's really close to the bottom of your deck, you actually have created a deck cycle where you don't get to Gamma Slam. And having a call for aid would allow you to cut 3 turns off of it. If you had it in the opening part, which once again, about 50-50, it's actually not quite, it's a little bit favors the latter. You aren't actually getting any deck speed up. A little bit, like half a turn. Because you could theoretically Gamma Slam twice in the same turn, using strength in numbers. It's difficult. You've got to have it in your opening hand. You've got to have enough resources on the board. To actually play it and hold on to the strength in numbers. You then have to hold on to the strength in numbers and the what's the other card I was thinking of? And the call for aid. You then call for aid and then strength in numbers. And then you're drawing probably a fifth of your deck, so you got like a 20% chance that you draw into a Gamma Slam and get to Gamma Slam a second time in the same turn. So this all averages out to about 1.5 turns per deck cycle, of saving 1.5 turns per deck cycle. This is assuming that the only thing you care about is Gamma Slamming as often as possible, which if you're maintaining that low hit points, I see no reason why you aren't just trying to finish the game with you've fully built your engine already, and you're just trying to turn it into massive damage, and Gamma Slam's probably your best option for that. So, yeah, like, this might mean that instead of getting 1 Gamma Slam, you might get 2 or 3, if it's a particularly long encounter. But in order to do this shenanigan, you're gonna have to use 3 copies. Because you need it, you absolutely need it, to be below the card that you want to replay as consistently as possible. I know that most of these are going to be dead cards, but you need it to be in the right spot, and the only way to more consistently do that is to have more copies. So that is how that shenanigans is all working. Yeah, so we're going to start building some decks. That's what we're going to do now. But because I'm building multiple decks this week, I'm going to cut the video here, and I'll see you in the next one.